This team is man. Okay, so I'm back from the edge of the world to confirm that, yeah, it is both indeed flat and held aloft on the back of a big-ass space turtle swimming through the endless void of the universe. And I was going to just stay there initially because, you know, F y'all, until somebody told me that these nut-ass Eagles somehow found a way to drop 3 games in a row for the first time since Black Lives Mattered and AIDS went airborne like 2 or 3 years ago. Now, before we actually get to what the problem with the Eagles actually is, let's first talk about what it's not and provide some context and hopefully some hope by the end for people like me just wondering why God cursed the Delaware Valley with the pro sports equivalent of a denied orgasm. So yeah, we gotta kind of acknowledge how ass the schedule was first, right? I mean, you got Dallas and you got to bye, okay. But then right after that, you got KC, Buffalo, San Francisco, Dallas again, and a frisky Seattle team. 3 of those teams, I think, were coming off like 10 days of rest, which is like an eternity in football, so shut the fuck up. I mean, we knew in April that this was going to be a bit of a run. And I always said if they could come out of this at least 3-3, then I could at least live with that. But damn, man. Okay, so for all the dumbass sports radio call-ins and Twitter scouts, Jalen is not the problem. Well, I mean, he is the problem, but him being the problem isn't really his problem. You get what I mean? All right, so the biggest difference between MVP Jalen and whatever the hell this is the turnovers, obviously. But we got to ask ourselves, why is this man giving more balls away than a male escort now? Well, I guess we can sort of let the cat out the bag for what I was building up to for later on. But this O is basically the 21 offense all over again before Nick basically said, F it, Shane, you got it. I'm going to just manage the clock and do head coach stuff. I said in an earlier video that my biggest fear for this team was that the O was starting to just become AJ down there somewhere. And it kind of was becoming that, and that's pretty much what it is now. Well, I mean, that is in between all of the endless tight end and bubble screens and QB draws on 3rd down for whatever effing reason. That's basically what it comes down to. Without getting into scheme too much, this all is more predictable than an NBA player's dating preference and the ensuing paternity suit. I mean, what else do you call it when one of the best players on one of your chief rivals is able to call out one of your plays on live stream before the ball is even snapped, Nick? And a big reason that is because the Eagles rank dead last in motion usage, which is absolutely insane considering that they're 12th in motion success rate. For y'all that don't understand how baffling that is, motion does 2 things for your O. It helps the QB more easily identify the coverage pre-snap. Generally speaking, if a defender follows the motion man for any distance, then you know that they're in man coverage. If your motion guy runs free, then it's zone probably. The second thing it does is it confuses the defenders for just long enough to help your playmakers get into space while the defenders are busy trying to figure out whose assignment is what. That's literally the difference between Philly and every other top tier O like San Francisco, Dallas, and Miami, obviously. The reason why shit looks so much freaking harder for Philly is because it is that much freaking harder. And it is for no real reason than because Philly makes it that way. For what reason? I don't really know, man, aside from hubris. Like, that's the only real answer I have. Nick and the crew just think that they can out-talent anybody they square up against, and that may be true, but not when the QB has to wait till Jesus comes back for the play to develop and then buy time scrambling when it doesn't. Yeah, for as much flack that Jalen gets, and rightfully so, for bailing clean pockets way too soon, for holding on to the ball way too damn long, and for coughing it up like a mucus plug, the reality is a lot of that is the coach's fault. Again, if you watch the QB school, or hell, just watch a game, you'll notice 2 things about the Eagles O. They live and die on explosive plays downfield. and they have little, if any, hot routes built into the scheme to get Jalen out of trouble if there are no answers downfield. Two reasons why he holds onto the ball so damn long and then bails the pocket after his first read is not there when he doesn't trust the play design. Again, just saying Jalen go ball may work when you're playing the Commies or the Giants, but when you're playing a team with just as many, if not more dudes than you, like San Fran or Dallas or Baltimore or Miami, even though you did beat them already, you can't just rely on out-talenting the ops. That's why Tua was an MVP candidate early on. It's why Lamar is having, even if not statistically, the most impressive year of his career efficiency-wise, and why Brock is probably going to wind up being the most underwhelming MVP since Aaron Rodgers that year when J.J. Watt scored 5 freaking touchdowns as an edge rusher. You know, in hindsight, we really should have known back then that this award was more worthless than a shit-flavored lollipop. Anyway, my point is, most folks outside of Philadelphia think that Nick is at best the football equivalent of Doc Rivers. He's a great motivator, but an average at best coordinator who benefits from having a top 3 roster to carry his vanilla concepts. And at worst, he's just Joey Two-Toes who owns the bar on 9th and Passyunk and won the South Philly equivalent of Willy Wonka's golden ticket when Howie and Jeff ran out of head coaching candidates. Hey, listen, I'm not saying that that's what I think of him. I honestly don't think that he gets as much credit as he deserves, but I do know that that's the way that he comes off to a lot of people. And I also know that this villain persona that he somewhat embraced is a two-edged sword. The shit stops being cute when you lose, and you lose for shit that's very much within your control. And that's ultimately, honestly, why I still have hope for this team. Everything I mentioned is very much fixable and can be done before it really starts to matter once the playoffs start. Build some more motion into the O. Give Jalen some easy get the hell out of Dodge options when the big plays don't develop in time. Add a few more wrinkles to the run game and cut down on the stupid penalties. And y'all will be cooking with gas again, which y'all kind of going to have to do if you want to make a run at the Super Bowl this year, because the D, Jesus H, tap dancing Christ, man. Okay, so let's get this out the way first. The only reason people are piling on Slay now is because he has the loudest mouth on the team, and that makes him an easy target. And it is annoying sometimes, especially after a loss, but please shut the fuck up, y'all. Slay is practically the only DB who's been consistently good in coverage this year, and him defending himself from the dumbasses watching at home or standing outside the NovaCare with trash cans waiting for their unemployment checks to come through is literally just human nature. Like, who would not defend themselves from that BS? Now listen, as mid as Bradbury has been this year, the problem doesn't end with him. And it doesn't even end with the linebackers, who on the whole have been ass this year, at least when it matters most. And it doesn't even end with Desai, who since that Miami game has fallen so far off the cliff that they gave his job to the least likable and successful of Belichick's disciples with 3 weeks left in the season. We all know that the Eagles are more enamored with big, meaty man mountains than Vince McMahon in the 80s. And that right there is the problem. Look, I'm a firm believer in the idea of building through the trenches, but that don't mean you build the trenches only, man. It's like this team only ever addresses a need that's not O or D line when it's almost too late to matter. For as much shade as Carson still gets in Philly, you got to admit that you'd be salty too if your best receiver in the previous 2 seasons was a semi-washed Alshon Jeffrey, and then your leading receivers after that was a revolving door of practice squad call-ups. I'm not even joking. There was a 4-week stretch of time where Travis freaking Fulgham could have piped any girl in the tri-state and her man would have bought the Jimmies. That's how bad it was. And when you did finally address the receiver problem, you took a project with work ethic issues that literally every analyst in the world raised an eyebrow at, when arguably the best receiver of his generation, who everybody, including the fan base, thought you'd take then, was sitting right there on the board and went the next pick after. Now, that's bad enough. And admittedly, nobody knew that Justin Jefferson was going to be Justin Jefferson at that point. But I also remember on draft night watching CeeDee Lamb fall from a potential top 10 pick to within striking distance from the Eagles, only for Jerry's geriatric ass to snatch him up. And all I could think was, what the hell are you doing, Howie? Listen, Howie deserves all the credit in the world for rebuilding this roster basically from scratch to be a contender again in like 5 years, and for knowing when to say that he effed up and move on, specifically when it comes to Carson's $138 million contract. Still, what if Tennessee's GM wasn't an absolute goon and didn't let AJ go for pennies? What if Jalen Carter hadn't dropped to number 9 overall, like literally no one but me predicted, and I even had the receipts to prove it? What if Vegas had taken Carter instead, which, I mean, LOL, considering Vegas, and Howie took Tyree Wilson or another lineman like Skoronski or Luke Van Ness or Broderick Jones or somebody, or hell, even Nolan frickin' Smith, who, remember, was actually being projected by a lot of people to go in that spot and wound up going 20 picks later to us anyway. Now, I know a lot of y'all are going to call cat, but I said this on draft night to no one in particular because I have no friends and I'm a lonely bastard. But the Smith pick felt like a luxury one at the time, especially considering you had 2 corners on the wrong side of 30 and at least 1 safety spot in flux. But you passed on both Joey Porter Jr. and Brian Branch for another freaking edge rusher, man. Like, I got the logic at the time. You want to keep the pass rushers fresh with fresh bodies in the rotation. But again, secondary was and still is a much more pressing need to this team to me. And the pick looks even worse now that Smith could barely even get on the field when Desai was still calling the shots. And sure, we did draft Ringo and Sidney later on, and Ricks, who wasn't even drafted, actually looks like the most promising of the 3 right now. But there's a reason those guys went where they did. They were, and they still are, projects. Ringo especially, who's rawer than a rare steak right now. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought this team was trying to make another run at the chip this year. What's the point of another lineman when every QB beyond the bar can just throw the ball over your freaking head for 400 goddamn yards before they even get home? Which now brings me to the most frustrating part about this D. There isn't a position that the Eagles value less than linebacker, not even ball boy. And I mean, that's not as big an issue when you're getting 70 freaking sacks in one season, or actually, you don't know it is until you assume that that's why it's not a problem. And you let the first pair of competent linebackers you've had since the Super Bowl year walk because F it, we ball, draft more big guys. Now, take PFF grades with a grain of salt, but TJ Edwards was rated their top off-ball linebacker last and this year, and it wasn't for no reason. And we didn't even bother making him an offer. Instead, we handed the job to Nakobe, who hadn't even played a snap on D to that point, only for him to end up on IR twice this year and disappoint when he was healthy anyway. Now, I personally don't think Nakobe has been as bad as people think. I honestly think if he did come back this year, it would give the D a pretty big boost. But the fact that he pretty much fell into our laps because of a medical red flag should tell you all you need to know about how he values linebackers. And guess what? We now have the worst ranked D on third down, the 5th worst passing defense, and the 5th worst red zone defense. Oh, and that top ranked rushing D we could hang our hats on in the beginning of the year is giving up 128 yards per game in the last 3 games. And a big part of that is because the middle of the field is basically a landing zone for opposing offenses. Point that I'm getting at is every move this team has made to shore up the D, from signing Roby off the street to trading for a semi-washed Byard, or signing Brokeback Shaq Leonard after Cunningham went down, who himself, along with Nick Morrow, were either on the practice squad or cut before the season even started, to now making Matt Patricia the not DC while Desai sits in exile in the skybox doing his best to look busy when his boss walks by, feels more like panic than a well thought out plan of action. And it all goes back to Jonathan fucking Gannon. Y'all think I'm joking, but had Gannon not jerked Nick and Howie around until after blowing the Super Bowl on two of the worst defensive calls I've ever seen, we likely would have hired Fangio before he went to Miami. And maybe Denard wouldn't have felt nearly as slighted as he did when we hired a guy whose D wasn't even that good in his last job, and he would have stayed on with us and coached up the DBs, especially the young bulls, and maybe CJ would have stayed too. I don't know. But my point is, when it rains, it effing pours in Philadelphia, man. That said, I'm just not giving up on this team's Super Bowl hopes, man. And if you do call yourself an Eagles fan and you are throwing in the towel now while we have the division lead with 3 weeks left in the season and likely the best possible route to the chip that we're going to have in view as long as we can wax these bottom feeders in the next few weeks, then I don't want to see no gold birds in the playoffs. F you and fair weather fandom, bucko. Respectfully. Listen, don't talk to me about pain, man. Don't talk to me about how bad this team can get unless you sat through Chip Kelly either releasing or trading all his best players he couldn't get along with because he's a chinless egomaniac with the personality of a pine cone, or watched Carson get concussed 2 plays into his playoff debut, or watched Alshon drop this pass that might have led to another Super Bowl appearance. Listen, I'm not going to lie to y'all. I might not watch this team again until the playoffs because my blood pressure literally can't take it, but I still have faith that they can make a run, especially if that run includes some combination of Green Bay or Minnesota or Seattle again, or whatever other fringe team farts their way into the wild card round. Detroit and whoever's left standing after San Francisco and Dallas beat the hell out of each other. But they're always going to have to carry this team through the finish line at this point, which is not impossible if Nick can get his face out the damn camera for once and draw up something that doesn't look like an Ask Madden play. God damn it.